And thank you so much to everyone who's in attendance today. My name is Debbie Owusu-Acha. I use she, her pronouns, and I am one of four, but of the three that you'll speaking with today, of the commissioners as part of the Ottawa People's Commission. To kind of start off, I wanted to kind of give a scene set around what our purpose is as a commission and some of our goals before I pass it along to my colleague, Monia. And then from there, my colleague, Alex, will also introduce himself. So the People's Commission is a critical component of the community's response to the disruption of last winter's convoy occupation that affected so many local residents and businesses. Our goal is to be a venue for healing and for justice, hearing the stories of those who were impacted most and looking at the response of governments and the community with a view to making recommendations to redress damages and reduce the risk and the impact of future disruptions. This afternoon is the third of a series of online public hearings that will continue through November and into early December. And we'll be holding hearings in person and meeting privately with local residents over the upcoming months. In addition, we're holding consultations with communities that were particularly impacted, including Asian seniors, women living in shelters, members of the Indigenous community, the Black community, the Muslim community, the 2S LGBTQI+ community, and others. We also strongly encourage those who are in attendance to submit written submissions if that is an accessible venue for you to participate and to have your story be heard. I'll pass it along to my colleague, Monia.
Thank you, Debbie, for reminding us all about the purpose, the objective, and how people can participate to the Ottawa People's Commission. My name is Monia Mazig. I am very privileged and honored to share this panel with both my colleague, Debbie and Alex. Again, I'm not going to repeat what Debbie already mentioned. As a commissioner, I'm very interested to hear your story, to hear your impact, how you have been impacted with the convoy, with the occupation. And I am here to take note, to ask questions. So please tell us whatever, if you feel comfortable to share with us your story. We are here to listen, to take note, to ask, clarify any things that will be helpful in the writing after we finish those hearings of our final report and recommendation. So if you have seen things, if you have experienced things, if you have any opinion about how things could have been done differently, or anything that you would like to share with me and my fellow commissioner, we are here to take note, and we will be very happy to address everything that your suggestion.
So maybe that's over to me. I'll just briefly introduce myself as well. Alex Neve, along with Monia and Debbie, pleased and honored to be part of this commission, which has really a very important purpose. And I think in many respects that's been reinforced as the official judicial inquiry has got underway. The absolute vital need to make sure that community level voices and perspectives are being heard with respect to the convoy has been so significantly highlighted, I think, by what we see coming out of those processes. So very much looking forward to this afternoon's session. We have 4 individuals who will be making presentations to us. What we have asked of each of our presenters is for them to make a brief opening presentation of around 5 minutes. And then Monia and Debbie and I will undoubtedly have a number of questions in follow-up, and then we'll move on to the next presenter. We are leaving it to presenters to choose whether or not they want to use their full name or even be identified at all. We will follow your lead. What I can assure everyone else is that the Commission has verified the identity of everyone who is making presentations this afternoon, but we're very cognizant, especially in the current climate, of the importance for some people to make sure that their privacy and identity is protected. Needless to say, we want to ensure that our exchange throughout the People's Commission in all of the sessions is respectful, and as such, we will not, there's a zero tolerance for any language or presentations or interventions that are offensive or hateful or violent in any way. I'm not directing that to today's 4 presenters in particular. We obviously make that comment at the beginning of every session. And lastly, I would again reiterate that, as Gael noted at the beginning, we are fortunate to have interpretation, a very important part of how we're advancing with these proceedings. And would ask our presenters, therefore, in particular, to keep that in mind and to speak slowly and clearly so that all of your important points get properly interpreted for the rest of us. And with that, I guess, setting the stage, those ground rules, so to speak, I would invite our first presenter to join the screen, I guess, is the best way to describe it, and we'd be pleased to hear from you.
Let me try putting the video on. There we are.
There we go. Yes, we hear you and see you.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so my name is Sean McGuire, and I'll start in French, and then I'll switch maybe a minute in to switch to English. Je tiens à remercier cette commission de m'avoir donné l'occasion de faire part de mes expériences directes avec le convoi. Je veux commencer par souligner que j'ai vu certaines des audiences précédentes de cette commission et que mon expérience est certainement minimale comparée à celle des résidents des centres-villes. Enfin, je me sens quelque peu inadéquat dans l'expérience, si vous voulez, d'être ici aujourd'hui. It'll be clear why in a second. Mon expérience est celle de quelqu'un qui vit à Nepean, clairement loin du centre-ville. Et j'ai 2 petites anecdotes dont j'aimerais parler. And I'll switch to English. I am a federal civil servant who, during the occupation, had to go into my government office in Gatineau approximately every second business day. On one of those days during the occupation, as I was walking south across the Chaudière Bridge, a pickup truck approached me from the War Museum with a big F Trudeau flag. I was wearing a mask around my face, mostly for the cold, because it was cold. And as the truck passed, I got a honk and as well as a middle finger from the passenger, and I returned the gesture. The truck continued across the bridge, and that was that. So that's anecdote number 1. My second anecdote relates to being somewhat involved in what some have called the Battle of Billings Bridge on February 13th. While driving home from Canada late that morning, my partner saw tweets on her phone on the evolving situation along Riverside Drive, and we decided to drive to the site. When we got there, the event had already been going on for at least an hour, and actually probably more than an hour, more like 2 or 3 hours, and the situation was relatively stable. There were a number of convoy vehicles stopped and held in place by a crowd in the hundreds. Police were also on site. Negotiations on how to defuse the situation were pretty clearly going on. Eventually, the situation was resolved and the vehicles were allowed to depart after having first removed their flags and other signage from their vehicles. My recollection from this event was that the frustration from the residents holding those vehicles in place was palpable. By that time, it had become quite clear that the city and the police were unwilling or unable to end the occupation of the core. This seemed to be the first opportunity for the community to push back, and the community was very much taking that opportunity to do so. From my experience, it was generally a peaceful event, but I think it also sent a pretty clear message that the remarkable patience that the residents of Ottawa had shown to this point was wearing very, very thin. That's my statement.
Thank you very much for that, Sean. Much appreciated. And I'm going to ask Debbie or Munya if they had any questions they wanted to follow up with.
Hi, Sean. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. I want to go back to that first anecdotal experience of you leaving your Gatineau office and having to deal with the middle finger and the honk as a result of you wearing your mask. I was curious if any of your other colleagues who were also going to the office may have had any interactions with trucker convoy protesters that were similar to yours. Just curious if you heard anything from your colleagues at all of something similar.
I have to say the answer would be no, but that's more to do with the sample size than like I was the only one in my group of 15 that was going into the office. It was the bare minimal, you know, the height of the pandemic, and no one was going into the office, but a few of us had to go in for security reasons. And I won't go further down that road, but the point is, I didn't see any of my coworkers during that time, literally. So I can't really answer that one way or the other.
No worries. Thank you so much.
Merci, Sean, pour votre témoignage. I have a question regarding the Billing Bridge event. It is very interesting. If you can, I mean, you gave few description, but I would like to ask you maybe to give us a little bit more information about that event. It seems that this is the first time where there was some sort of organized counter-protest to the convoy, at least as we understand it, with big numbers. You spoke about there were maybe like negotiation, like on the side going on. You spoke also about the presence of police. Can you just describe a little bit more about this sort of whatever you saw, whatever, you know, your impression, how many people approximately, like nothing really in details, but I would love to know about that, you know, encounter.
Okay. I can throw in some more details. So we arrived and we parked in Billings Bridge shopping center parking lot. Came across to Bank Street, actually interacted with one of the supporters of the convoy, calling everyone communists. That was interesting. Then we walked across Bank Street. We came upon the corner of Bank and Riverside, and it was clear there was many people there. So many people on Riverside Drive and along the side of Riverside Drive. There was no traffic moving. The road is blocked, I believe. There was a table at the front, I remember that, and there was pizza and donuts and I think Tim's coffee and so on.
So are these, sorry to cut you off, but are these table and coffee, are these the counter protester or are these?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So the counter protesters, not the convoy folks that were stuck, being held in place by people, basically.
And were the convoy in their trucks or were they on?
Yes.
Okay.
They were absolutely in their trucks.
Okay.
And vehicles. It was not, I'm trying to remember if there were any actual big rigs. I don't think so. I think it was mostly just sort of pickup trucks and vans and sort of medium-sized vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
I say a couple hundred folks were there at that point. As I said, we arrived later than it started for sure. And we had heard just walking around and talking with some people that, yeah, there's negotiations going on. And So that's why I said what I said, because I'd heard it.
Mhm.
I'm trying to remember if there's anything else I'm missing from your
Did
question.
you see the police trying, for example, to stop the convoy, or to, somehow, move them, or
So we stayed long enough to actually see some of the vehicles leave. And if you have you would take a map to describe it, but what they did was, in the end, the solution was that they had to take out all the markings. So any signs and any flags that were on their vehicle had to be removed. And they were moved with police escort, one at a time, through a parking lot. Before you get to Bank Street, there's a commercial building just before you get to Bank Street coming from Riverside going west. And they would move one vehicle at a time through this parking lot and out, and then that vehicle would then be facing east and would go down Riverside east.
Yeah. Thanks. Did you see anything like violent confrontation?
No.
Violent? Okay.
No. It was that. Okay. It was entire. That's okay. It was entire. Like what I saw, I don't know how it started, but what I saw was people were just sitting in their cars, patiently sort of looking around, not doing anything for a number of hours. I was there 2 hours, 2 or 3 hours. And people were standing in front of them, like in front of the car, so that you couldn't move, right? And that was it.
One last question, Sean. In the previous hearings, we've heard from residents, especially from Center Town and Lower Town, telling us about flags. Did you see any flags that made you like either uncomfortable, or that you maybe did not recognize, or that were obviously problematic?
I recognized all the flags. I didn't see any sort of odd flags from other countries or anything like that. I know on the hill I saw some Patriote flags. I'm from Quebec, so I know what that is. I didn't see any in this group. Mostly Canadian flags. I think there was probably a couple of F. Trudeau flags or signs. Nothing I hadn't seen earlier in the maybe I was just immune to it at that point, but and you don't usually see, before that I had not seen an F. Trudeau flag, for months before. So, but I guess I was used to it at that point.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks again for this, Sean. I've got a couple of questions with respect to both of the incidents. So first, with respect to your commuting to work, I hear what you said in response to Debbie about the fact that in your group, you were the only one going in. But I'm wondering if you had any wider sense as to whether or not the convoy was at all being disruptive for I guess I'm focusing on federal civil servants, on people's ability to get to work, either because of literal inability with roads blocked or buses not running, or something more personal and related to people feeling fearful or intimidated. Did you pick up any of that within the civil service?
Within the civil service, I didn't, but again, and as I said in my statement, I live in Nepean, which is far away from all the fun and games, right? So the only experience I would have had personally would have been coming across the bridge, and that was basically open. There were trucks along in front of the War Museum, but the path from the train station at Pimsey across was free, and so buses were going across. So the actual access to work for me, coming from Nepean to Gatineau, not going through downtown at all, right? was unhampered, but that doesn't, I mean, I
But
can't
you
speak
were,
to,
I
but
guess what I'm wondering is, were you kind of even picking up any buzz that others were having any difficulty? What was kind of the general situation for
I
civil
mean,
servants?
people were told not to go into the office downtown. So and in advance, like even as it started, I'm sure we were warned to be aware of that. You may not be able to get to the office, even in my situation, but I could, so I did. But I can only imagine and assume that federal civil servants working in the downtown core, those who would have had to get into the office, which not that many, wouldn't have been able to, right? So the government continued to function, as it were, like I was still interacting with people in departments that I know are located in the red zone, let's put it that way, which means they were probably working from home, right? So,
which was a well-established COVID reality anyway, right?
correct,
Right.
correct.
Now let's switch to Billings Bridge. Now I get that you say that you were there, 1 or 2 hours into the whole affair. But one of the things that we've heard from a couple of people, and I even just remember this more widely from some of the media and or social media coverage at the time, was that I think especially early on, some of the counter protesters felt like they were getting a little bit of pushback from the police, or that the police were not necessarily overly enthused about the fact that they had decided to do this. And we've even heard people share some kind of snide comments that they received from police. Now, whether or not I get that you were kind of it was well underway by the time you got there, so that you wouldn't have witnessed necessarily any of that. But I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about, even from conversations you were having with other counter protesters, as to what were you picking up in terms of how the police felt about this whole affair.
There was, as I mentioned, a general vibe that the police weren't doing enough with respect to the convoy itself, and so maybe that was sort of spilling over into this, and in the sense of, oh, they have the manpower to come out and deal with this, i.e., with us, but they don't have the manpower to deal with the actual convoy itself downtown. So there was a bit of yeah, there were some comments along those lines. But like you're right to say, though, I arrived late on the scene to see much of the these snide comments that you're reporting. Which I believe you. I'm just saying, by the time we got there, it was I won't say winding down, but past the halfway
point. And actually, I should have clarified more as to who I was accusing of being snide, because I think actually what I was hearing was people sharing some snide comments on the part of the police, who and that's not an unusual thing sometimes to hear from police in these situations. You people shouldn't be taking matters in your own hands. It's our job to be dealing with situations. This is dangerous or whatever on your part. I guess it's, and of course this is all infused with some people having concern that at least some of the police had a bit of empathy, or maybe empathy isn't the right word, but a bit of alignment with some of the convoy supporters. So I guess it was that piece I was curious as to whether you at all picked. Obviously we would want police not to be to come into a situation like that impartially, right?
Right. Which is kind of why I ended my statement with sort of this was a sense that the patience was wearing thin. It wouldn't, and I remember coming away from it with a sense of, this has got to end soon, because if it's this easy to get a couple hundred people, it's probably not that hard to get a couple thousand people and to sort of counter protest for real against the actual convoy downtown, and that probably wouldn't end well. So like I said, up to this point, you saw, you know, individuals bringing signs into the convoy and people yelling off of their porch and so on. But it was the first, I think Monia had mentioned this was the first sort of, I wouldn't even say organized, because it wasn't that organized, but grouping of a significant number of people around the convoy. And you could see where this might go. And maybe I am just guessing how it might go, but you could see how it could mushroom into a counter movement of significant numbers.
Right. All right. Well, thank you. Those were my questions. So unless Debbie or Monia help, Debbie's got another one.
Yeah, just one, kind of hearing, you know, what you've been speaking about and what you saw, especially from the participation in the Battle of Billings Bridge. You know, we've heard mainly from folks who were either in the direct red zone or I would say maybe the yellow zone in the periphery, like Bandy and Overbrook. And I'm just curious, as someone who is a resident of Nepean, you know, we often haven't heard from those who are kind of further away from the downtown core. And I was just kind of curious, other than, you know, your interaction with the convoy folks when you were heading to work, what was the impression from maybe your neighbors about what you folks were seeing in the media in relation to what was happening downtown? I'm just kind of curious to know, from your perspective, what other residents in Nepean were thinking and what their impression of the occupation may have been. It'd be really interesting just to get an idea of what conversations were happening outside of the red zone.
Wow. Well, I can't speak for everyone in Nepean,
Yes.
but from the folks that I interact with around here, friends and neighbors kind of thing, it was somewhere between morbid curiosity and nervousness. Like the morbid curiosity side would be like, why are they still here? Like, what are you doing? Like, you're not, like, don't see the benefit from anybody's perspective of them continuing to stay after, say, week 2. And morbid curiosity to, what did I say before? To nervousness, like kind of what I was saying just now, like, you know, how does this end practically? And can it end anything other than with at least some minimal violence? Like it was hard to see how it would end well. So yeah, that range, if that helps.
Absolutely.
I mean,
thank you.
We were, to be, and as I said in my statement, like as you just correctly said, we're way out here in Nepean, right? So I'm not even going to pretend to say, oh, I was deeply impacted by the convoy. I wasn't, right? I mean, it's pretty clear that I wasn't. I got to work when I had to, you know, yeah, but people were watching, people were listening, people were like somewhere between curious and nervous, right? Like, anyway.
Thank you so much.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this, Sean. It's you know, everyone who comes in front of us brings a slightly different vantage point, and the Nepean Chaudière Bridge, Billings Bridge vantage point is an important one. We appreciate that. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks.
All right, so I believe that means we are ready to move on to our second presenter, who will show up on the screen. Great. I'll leave it to you to introduce yourself and make your opening presentation. Yes, we can.
Hi, I'm Nugs. I live in the Centertown area. and I've been greatly affected by the convoy and counter-protesting it since the beginning, pretty much. Let me know when it's okay to go. Good to go?
Thumbs
Okay.
up. Yes. Thank you.
So basically, I grew up in Centertown, but I actually moved just to this home that I live in now a few months before the convoy. And before the convoy arrived into town, I actually had no idea what was really about to happen. I'd only heard that there was something traveling, some anti-vax thing traveling across Canada. I didn't know that they were planning to reside or take up place here, which means I didn't really get to prepare myself both for the noise and mentally too as well for what was about to happen. The first day that they arrived into town, it was like unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It was pure chaos. The noise was unbearable. There was groups of drunken men openly drinking out in the street, screaming and yelling. There was men like setting themselves up down the street at the corner of the street to scream absurdities at people walking by when you go to walk your dog. Men were spitting in people's faces. There were signs everywhere. It was chaos, and you'd try to come into your house to just relax from it all, but the noise and the honking was so much that you couldn't. And you would even try and put your headphones on, and even then you could not drown out the noise. It didn't matter what you did. And as someone who suffers from fairly serious mental health issues, including psychosis, it was really starting to, within the first day, make me feel like the honking that night went up to about 3 a.m. the first night. And the second day, I tried to go take my dog to the dog park early before anything had started again, and to get a sense of what was going on. I got up at 7 a.m. that morning, and the honking had already started again on that Sunday. Where I went to go take my dog to the dog park was where a good portion of the truckers would park their trucks and sleep, which was around Techwall Dog Park. The next day, on Monday, I tried to go run errands down by Bank Street, and that was the first time I'd seen Bank Street. Bank Street was terrifying. I'd never seen it like that before. And when I was getting down to Bank Street, there was new cars, groups of people arriving and coming in to just set up shop, essentially. When I was running errands, I'm walking in front of a truck with my dog, and one person blasts the horn in our face. My dog and I jump. Everybody around us starts laughing and yelling, "Oh, we love you, peace and love, we love you." And that's when I started screaming and fighting with them. And I ended up having a severe panic attack that sent it to the point that I wouldn't leave my house for another week. I only left my house after that to go to a counter protest on the Saturday. And then again, it was terrifying even to get down there. So I didn't leave my house again for another week. During this time, I was trying my best to document everything I could. You're watching videos on the internet of what was going on outside of you. It was insanity. Partway into this, I had a convoyer dox me and put my information out on the internet because I was putting info out for people to see about what was really going on, and they wanted to silence that. So that's when the threats and doxing started, and people were telling me they were parking their trucks outside my house and waiting for me to walk outside my door. Walk my dog outside my door, essentially. On February 11th, in the morning, I read news that someone in downtown had killed themselves because of the convoy, because it had driven them to the point of thinking that there was, there was no hope and this was the end of times. And as someone who suffers from depression and suicidal ideations, I remember feeling that exact thing. And sorry if I cry. And I remember something in me snapped that day, and I couldn't take it anymore. And so that day I went out and just tried to fight back in whatever way I could. So the only thing I knew what to do was to document. And so I walked from my house all the way down to the Byward Market, and I tried to document everything. I took down every license plate I could, and I went down every street I could and documented everything. And after that night, I felt like I'd lost all hope and everything. And I became extremely suicidal myself, because what I saw that day felt like it was living in an alternate reality that I would never escape. Felt like there was no hope. The cops were clearly never going to help us. No one was coming to help us. The day after that, someone called the cops on me for a wellness check because I expressed being suicidal and wanting to kill myself. The cops arrived at my house, and I remember yelling and screaming at them to just do something and help us, to just please do their job and help us. And it was that same day, the next day, that the Battle of Billings Bridge, and the day after that the Emergencies Act was enacted. And that was the first time I'd felt hope in almost 2 weeks since it started. And after that, we just waited until they cleared them out. And I guess I've been involved in it since with the counter protesting, but that's just my 5 minutes on during the protest, I guess. Sorry that I cried.
Oh, no, not at all. And I know it was 5 minutes, but if you did feel there was, I don't want you to feel that there's something you left out. If there was something you wanted to share.
Oh,
with
there's
us.
a lot I've left out.
Okay, well, maybe
myself prior.
Well, and some of that may come up in our questions.
Yeah.
But thanks so much for being here, Nugs, and thank you. You know, it's so understandable how raw and personal this was at the time, and still is so many months later. And we just have huge appreciation and respect for you. You sharing this with us in the face of that difficult personal pain. Maybe I'll turn to Munya or Debbie to see if they'd like to start off with some questions. Debbie's got her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Nugs, thank you for speaking with us. And I know how difficult it is to be vulnerable, especially going through what you went through and the psychological impacts that the convoy had on you. And so I just wanted to say that you're heard and we really appreciate it. And I think it's worth mentioning, especially for those who are also in attendance, that we are working in partnership with the Centertown Community Health Center, and there's some resources on the Ottawa People Commission's website if you would like to speak to anyone. And this goes out to you too as well, Nugs. I'm sure you have a support system, but if you need additional resources, that's available. I did want to jump first to kind of ask a question because unfortunately I do need to step out, but I did want to at least be here to hear what you had to say and at least ask one question before I leave. But I really wanted to hear from your experience a little bit more about, you mentioned at the end the police check, and I'm sure my colleague Alex will ask you a few more questions related to your experiencing with police. I'm curious what your thoughts are on how quickly the police were able to respond to that with regards to a mental health check, as opposed to everything else that was happening that was driving the exasperation of your symptoms in this case. I really wanted you to maybe probably walk through what your thoughts were on that, your interpretation of it, because it seems like quite the jarring difference in terms of response.
Yeah, and it was honestly very, the police arrived at a moment when I was going over videos of them quite literally helping convoyers, like partying with them in the streets and just being complicit to them. And then they knocked on my door and I opened up the door, and in that moment, it was just like, I don't know. And there was 3 police officers there for one wellness check. And it just felt like, exactly like you were saying, like, how could they show up so quickly in no time at all to come and see if they can give me a ride to the hospital, but they can't do anything to help us out in the streets. And that day before, when I'd walk through the streets, I saw the cops everywhere. They were everywhere. They were just sitting there, standing and watching, doing nothing. And even seeing the videos of it too, as well, of the stuff I wasn't witnessing personally myself. And then it just felt like, why are you here at my door when you could be out there doing something? And that's what I said to them too, as well. You could be out there doing something, just anything to give us a hope that something is going to happen. But instead, you guys are doing nothing and showing up at my doors and doing anything. It just something, but they were doing nothing the entire time. Yeah, sorry. I hope that answers it.
It does. Thank you.
Can I jump in?
Yes, indeed, Monia. I just want to let everyone know that we knew she was going to have to leave, but that our colleague Debbie has a very busy afternoon, and obviously the fact that she's had to move away isn't at all reflective of anything other than a busy afternoon. Mm-hmm. So just to explain why she's had to leave. Over to you, Monia.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm very sorry for your story, for what happened to you. And I know maybe this is sort of late, but thank you for your courage and for coming forward and sharing your story with us. I have a question, because you said that you lived in Ottawa in Centertown or Lower Centertown, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, all your life you grew up here. And And I have a question here. And you said you went out, you tried to document everything. You took picture of the driver license. Basically, I mean, this is my interpretation, but I think you wanted basically to do the work of the police, or to do some sort of to do their job, to, you know, what did you want the police to do, and that they didn't do? What did you want them to do? What have you seen in particular that bothered you, where the police were not there, were doing nothing? What did you want them to do?
Okay, so two parts of that. Just the first thing I want to mention is that the license plates thing wasn't particularly for me to feel like I'm doing the job of the police. It was because that was the only thing people were saying online to do that could help potentially, was to call insurance companies or something to see if we could get. So it was more the only thing I was hearing to do as a citizen. So it's just like, that's all I knew how to do. But when it came to the police, really anything, I witnessed in front of the police them letting people openly drink in the streets. I witnessed them quite literally helping parks come in and truck. I saw them just like, they were watching as things that were clearly not legal or going against certain bylaws, and not doing anything, just standing there. So more than anything, what I wanted them to do was their job. I wanted them to do their job. I just wanted to see even the smallest little bit of them doing their job, besides standing there or quite literally just being complicit and helping them, because I saw them even helping them at times, which was the most upsetting, I think. Like I even saw.
How did they help them? How did they help them? Can you tell us, how did they help them? How the police helped the trucker?
Well, they were helping the trucks come in and park and finding spaces. Because the thing is, I live close to Wellington. I'm maybe only a few blocks from Wellington. And you could see at times the cops were letting them come in around the barriers a little bit. It was closer down near where the Supreme Court was, a little bit past there, where like I think it's the archives area is. But around there, I was noticing the police were kind of just like helping them set up a little bit more. And in videos, you could see people had captioned it too as well. Like one evening, I watched a video of a DJ who set up for one of the convoys Friday night parties, and someone recording asked him, "How'd you get in here? Because there's blockades now." And they said the police helped me come in and park. But yeah, just that kind of stuff a lot of the time.
Thank you. Have you seen one more question. Have you seen such a thing before? You lived in downtown, all your life. Have you seen such a thing similar?
Never in my life. And I've lived in Montreal too as well. I've lived downtown Montreal, where you see crazy stuff sometimes. I have never in my life ever seen anything like this, because it wasn't just like a rambunctious party. It was like a rambunctious party times 50, mixed with a whole bunch of religious. I was seeing signs talking about how Ottawa was the Antichrist. I was seeing signs talking about like Trump coming to Canada, things like that. It was just insanity mixed with an awful tailgate party, mixed with religious stuff. It was just like, it was a mix of stuff I've never seen in my life. You've heard about it or seen it online, but I've never in my life seen it on my doorstep. And I think that's what was messing with my head and my mental health a lot too as well, was seeing your neighborhood turned into something you never, like, it literally looked like an alternate dimension. I've never seen anything like that in my life. And the people were just so out. It was just, I don't even know how to describe it. It was just like unlike anything I've ever seen. So no, honestly.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm very sorry for your experience.
Thank you for hearing me out. I appreciate it.
So I had a couple of questions, Nugs. So again, thank you so much for this. So I'd like to go back to the police visit to your apartment. And I can imagine what that must have felt like, to open the door and find 3 police officers standing there at a time when, as you point out, police didn't seem to be there for you. And I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about the exchange you had with them when you said back to them, why aren't you doing your job? guess what can you share with us as to what they were saying about what they saw their role to be, or whether they were or were not doing what
So
they should be?
I actually have the entire interaction recorded if anybody does ever want access to that, because the moment I looked through the peephole and saw it was the police, I put my phone on and recorded. Because I thought at that moment we need to document everything. So I do have the entire interaction on camera if anybody wants access to that. But essentially
We will follow up with you, because I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. So the moment I essentially kind of started getting upset, saying, you know, please just do your job, you could be, and when they said, can we help you? I said, yeah, you can help me by, you know, being out there and making a difference in the streets. And that's when they started getting very sarcastic to me and being like, okay, well, if you don't want any help then, and getting very like snide. And like you were saying earlier, snide's the term I would use actually for that. And if you watch the video, you'll see their tone changes by the end, where they're just very like, okay, well, you're on your own. And then they kind of just left. So that was it.
Did they actually come into the apartment, or this was all recorded at the doorway?
I was in my doorstep. They were just like right out front of my doorstep.
Right. So, I mean, do you feel like they really, I mean, obviously they've been called because you had a friend who was concerned about you. Do you feel that they actually took that side of things? I mean, let's put aside, you know, whether they, you know, were doing their job with respect to what was happening out on the street. But do you feel that they actually, in a serious way, even did their wellness check with you?
No, because at the beginning, before I snapped and was like, you know, you could be out there doing your job, I kind of was just explaining the fact that I was feeling suicidal because I was seeing them at not, you know, helping them and seeing everything out on the street not being done, and just this continue on for almost 2 weeks. And I was crying and explaining to them why I was feeling suicidal. And not once did they kind of like try and be gentle or talk about it. They kind of just were very like, oh, okay. And then the moment I snapped and was like, you know what would help, because they were like, do you want help or not? And then the moment I said, you know what would help, that's when they kind of got like a little rude from there on. But like before then, there was no gentleness, there was no empathy, there was no compassion. It was just, we're here, we were called, do you need help or not? No, cool, all right, bye, kind of thing.
And was there any kind of follow-up on their part or anyone else with the police?
No,
Right.
they just said, do you want to go to the hospital? I said no. And then they said, okay, bye. And then they left, and that was it.
Had you had any other encounters with the police when you were out on the street? Had you ever approached police or tried to report anything to police when you were out, for instance, doing your patrols?
There was once, I think it was like early on when I was still feeling really like having panic attacks when I was out and about, where I can't remember what it was, but I saw I think I might have a recording of it, so I'll have to go through I documented a lot, so I do have recordings of a lot. But I saw a truck doing something that was clearly not legal. It wasn't like violent or anything like that. It was just something like they were making like they had a truck horn that was like extra loud or something like that, and they were just pressing on it repeatedly and nonstop. And the cop was just kind of standing there watching, not doing anything. And I was just looking at the cop like, why aren't you stopping him or asking him to stop in any way? So when the cop passed by, his window was down and he was driving slowly, like past, I think it was like Laurier or something like that. And I just kind of asked him, like, do you want to go say anything to him or ask him to stop? And the cop just like looked at me and then drove past, and that was it. Besides that, the only other time would have been when I was the day that I went and kind of snapped and went from my house all the way down to the market to get everything down. It was late night and I was passing down Wellington around Rideau, Sussex, and there was an entire squad. There was like maybe almost 10 cop cars and a bunch of them just hanging out there watching a huge party going on. And I kind of just yelled at them like, good job doing your job. That was kind of it, but that's basically it. That's the most interaction I think I had besides that.
Right. And the other thing I wanted to follow up on is you referenced, I think you said that there was 2 times when you essentially stayed in your apartment for about a week.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more to us about what that was like. I guess maybe 2 pieces. One, why? What was it that made you feel you needed to stay at home for that full week? And then secondly, what was that like? What was the experience of, I guess, literally not being able to leave your apartment for a week? What was that like for you?
So prior to the convoy, I actually suffered from agoraphobia. So not being able to leave my house wasn't something that's totally unfamiliar to me, but usually it's my own mind that's trapping me in my house, not people outside of it. And it was something else entirely, because a lot of times when I'm suffering from my agoraphobia, my house is my safe space. And so at least when I'm, too afraid to go outside, my house is safety for me, and it helps me feel okay and safe and comfortable, and I'm able to live safely in here. But for the first time, my house wasn't safe anymore. And my home, this was the first place that's ever felt like a home for me in my life, now suddenly wasn't a safe place anymore, and wasn't comfortable or safe anymore, because even here you couldn't really escape anything, and I'd be stuck in my home constantly doom scrolling at what was going on outside. It's like you couldn't escape it even in your own house. It was just nonstop. But the thing is, even though I was suffering from agoraphobia, if anything, this convoy almost helped me a little bit, because I've gotten a lot better since then. Because the day that I kind of snapped, something in me just like it's almost like exposure therapy in a way, where the worst of what my mind had usually imagined would happen outside of my house was already going on. And so I just threw myself in it. And that's when it was a lot easier to go around and kind of like get into the middle of the convoy and document stuff. But before then, it was terrifying, because I wasn't used to actually having worst case scenario in my head actually happening every time you leave your house. And so it became that every single time I left my house, I was having a panic attack and having to immediately run back to my house. And then my house wasn't safe either. And it was just nonstop. So it just became, I'd never left my bed for the most part for like almost a week. But it was around February 11th, February 12th, where I couldn't handle it anymore. And that's when I kind of snapped. But before then, it was just not leaving my bed for the most part. Because it turned my house into a terrible place too, I guess.
Yeah, no, understandably. I think that's all my questions. Monia, did you have anything else you wanted to ask?
Well, I had many, but I think maybe I will. You mentioned, Nags, about basically, you said the day after the cops arrived to your place, when you had that encounter with them, when they came like supposedly checking on you. You said there was the Battle Bridge, and then after that there was the Emergency Act. What happened? What did you see happening after that? Like, did you see any shift? And how did does it look to you, like the shift, and how things change?
So it was definitely a shift between, I think that weekend really shifted things for a lot of people, because between the Battle of Billings Bridge and then the Emergencies Act, I think everybody knew enough was enough. Something needed to happen. And then the Emergencies Act happened. And that's when people knew, okay, history's changing. Clearly something's going to happen at this point in time. And so at that point, I think before then, I think not even just me, I think a lot of people down here had lost hope. And I think that was the first time people felt like there might be hope that things might end. So it definitely felt like between those two events there was a shift, and it felt like now, even though we're still stuck in it, we just have to wait, because it will end. We just have to wait until it does, essentially. So it started to feel like the light at the end of a tunnel, I guess, is a way. So at least personally for me, but that's what I could feel in conversations I was seeing online from other community members and stuff, that between those two events it felt like we might finally reach the end and a little bit of hope. And it was more just having to wait it out and be patient, And then a couple of days after that, they started telling people to stay in their house because they were going to start clearing out the red zone and stuff like that. So it was pretty quick after that, that they were going to start clearing them out, essentially.
Thank you. That's very important. Thanks.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for having me also. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Nugs. We really appreciate it, and we know it was a very, very difficult experience for you, and so are particularly grateful for you sharing it again with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, so we are ready for our next presenter.
Hey, my name is Clayton Goodwin. I am the CEO of the Veterans Accountability Commission. I'm an activist and a veterans advocate that has been greatly involved in community organizing against not only the convoy, but what went on in Ottawa as a whole. During the occupation of our city, I took over a protest organized by other citizens of Ottawa out front of the Ottawa Police Station on Elgin Street on the third day. And we held that counter protest for accountability up until the 17th of February. We were there in numbers. Actually, I would say a lot of strangers came from Centertown who had had enough on the 13th of February, while others were at the Battle of Billings Bridge. There was close to 70 of us that stayed at the police station and organized there that day. And basically, I've seen many things while there. I have seen people come in to lay in information for being assaulted for simply saying, don't bring that jerry can down there. I've had wonderful citizens of this city pull up in their vehicles, roll their windows down and thank us while wearing head coverings that we were there when they did not feel safe. I stood on the sidewalk with members of the two-spirited LGBTQ plus community while organizing safe walks so that we knew everyone was getting home safely after we were out front of the police station. I have since then organized counter protests against Rolling Thunder, counter protests against Mr. Top's use and desecration of our National War Memorial. And I have been with other community members, including our previous panelist Nugs, out front of the Tupac Church addressing the leftovers of what we've seen in February. From my analysis and understanding, since I do watch the far right, the far righteous, and the far right of this nation deeply and have for decades, this has been a failure of proactive intelligence gathering and proactive policing as a whole. Basically, if I knew that they failed to get this together and on the move last summer, and they actually just managed to get it together and come into our city in February, most of my accounts were blocked before they arrived for saying derogatory things towards what they were doing, because I knew what they were coming for. So I was blocked probably in December. I don't think police even started talking about this till January. So I was well out ahead of what was going on. And basically what I witnessed horrifies me as a Canadian and someone who wore a uniform for every Canadian. As I said, there are many things to discuss, but failure of leadership, failure of intelligence gathering, and failure of proactive policing should be the top of the list in Canada. What we can never stop talking about is that these people were organized and pushed to organization by the Americanization of the far right politics of our country. These had embedded in them trained veterans, trained ex-police officers who organized and orchestrated the occupation of our capital of our country. And this can never, ever not be spoken about. We have those that would have had links into police agencies, questionable links, whether through a past brotherhood, whether through being a veteran, on the streets, counter to conduct and good order, counter to rule of law. We saw a main example of the failure of our educational institutes, or maybe a plan by the far right to diminish our education so that people would show up speaking about American law, speaking about things that just confuse everybody. What we saw down there was a lack of decorum in Canada, and it needs to be talked about. Adults need to get in a room, and we need to start discussing what our goals are and what our expectations are of those that wear a uniform for our nation. And I'm welcome any questions about the experiences I've had this year. I ran social media groups. We had to lock them down because of doxing. I've experienced 21 death threats since February. I have been doxxed myself. I have been harassed, and I won't stand down against those that will scare or hope to scare marginalized communities of Canada. This is simply un-Canadian.
Thank you very much, Clayton. Powerful presentation. And I know I have some questions, and I expect Monia may have some as well. Monia, did you want to jump in first?
Sure.
Oops.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing with us your experience. I think it's very powerful and important because in the past, basically hearing, we had the opportunity to hear from citizens, from residents. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, we had some also people with a little bit of military, I think, experience also coming and share with us their knowledge and what they have seen from that perspective. But I think this is the first time we have someone with your experience, with your knowledge, to tell us about this this very, very confusing, problematic link that you talked about. First of all, failure, you said, failure of the intelligence gathering. And second, it's like the failure also of the proactive policing. So I think this is a very good angle, at least I speak on my behalf, it's very good angle to explore in our work. My question, I mean, I have many questions, but I would love to hear from you. You said that there is an American sort of connection somehow, that you have seen it, that also was confusing people somehow. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well,
yes,
sure can. If you go research some of the leaders of the convoy, you will find a lot of the supportive or anything that was recorded. I'm sure it's up in cloud space by some of my colleagues and activists. Basically, you saw a lot of the profiles that ran a lot of the convoy organizers and supporters. You basically saw it being run by profiles that were from the United States. Mm-hmm. You saw the what was it, give, send, go. As soon as they were done grifting in one way, they went right to a Christian hub to fund more money right away, an American company. I know a colleague of mine, we basically gather information. We found a direct link of crypto from California to Calgary to Convoy. So basically, this is what I do. I've been politically active for a very long time. I went up against the Harper government in 2015.
Sorry, you said from California to
Calgary to Convoy.
Okay.
Now, yeah. If you look, and if anyone wanted to pay deep attention and actually reverse engineer what was going on, you see convoy links directly into the heartland of Western Canada, right into the heartland of conservative politics. And if you want to know an area that is deeply influenced by America, that's it. Mm. And what we see is a spillover onto the streets of Canada this year.
Okay, so thank you. I have another question here for you. We have heard from people who were supporting the convoy that they were basically liberated by the convoy, that they didn't see any things that bothered them or that troubled them. It was peaceful. It was really a convoy about freedom, about their rights, protecting individual rights. What do you tell me? What do you respond to that? I would love to hear.
I conducted the intelligence gathering to find a death threat sent to an employee on Parliament Hill, which got into the hands of the OPS. So there's one. I watched people who were assaulted come in to lay in information on the OPS. There's two. I know a clergy member who could not do his feeding program who was assaulted on the streets.
Yes.
I seen individuals going by being harassed, women followed, people scared. I watched our mayor candidate, Catherine McKinney, have to do safe walks in their, I apologize, their community. Basically, you see a structural, how can I word it? Inside of any movement that is echo chamber or cult-like, you will have fanatics believing one thing, and you will have the rational citizens witnessing other things.
Mm-hmm.
And what other people witnessed, you had Charlie Angus came right down to meet us. That was one politician who come right down to the police station to see us in person and told us for accountability, we were exactly where we were supposed to be.
Thank you.
And plain and simply, no, complete marginalized communities of different faiths, of different ethnicities, they were afraid, they were scared.
Yes.
They were being followed, you know, they were staying home. And as for freedom, what is more free than a 92% vaccinated city willing to open up its businesses and get on with life? That is what we were willing to do prior to them arriving. And what were they protesting? We went on with life. Our mandates were scheduled to end, and they did. We were following and watching science. And I'm sorry to say, I have not lost any freedoms from any way, shape, or form. All I had to do was take care of myself, to take care of others. When it comes to rights, there are also responsibilities. There are obligations.
Mm-hmm.
We saw Americanized law quoted in our courtroom. I do not know how insulting that would be to a judge. I do not have their education level. But I suspect if you are a Canadian judge with our laws, to have American law quoted to you, to your face, that would be offensive.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a failure. We have the fabric of our own society was literally tested. And what did we see? We saw Pierre Poilievre walking out to meet and greet those that are scaring others. We saw Candace breaking bread with them at restaurants. We saw individuals meet with other members that were supporting this convoy and supporting this movement, where talks of civil war was discussed openly. Thankfully, I watched some conservative politicians that seem to have morals stand up and leave that meeting. We have seen decorum leave us in Canada this year, and it needs to be discussed. Goals need to be discussed. I did not lose any freedoms other than taking care of myself and taking care of others. That is what happened during the whole pandemic. There is nothing rational to be said about what went on. My experience alone, when you have officers come up to you at the OPS station and go, so when Slolly is gone, are you going to stop? Well, you can't stop because these people are in their echo chambers. They are a threat. They had far right accelerationists. You have people that I saw everything from Nazi flags right down and like, I'm sorry, but if you truly are that group, you would take that person underhand and you'd walk them right off the ground, or you'd walk them down to the police station. If you truly cared, you would take care of that yourself. And that I say out to my peers that served in a uniform. How could you stand on the same street with that flag? My two grandfathers fought against that flag. That's, you know, another question. I get quite passionate about this.
Thank you. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Thank you.
I did have a couple of questions as well. One is just a factual question. I'm not asking for your address, but I'm curious as to whether do you live in Centretown?
I live in Old Ottawa East, and when the directions and the winds were happening, like I would walk down to the police station, but I could hear the horns and everything. I only went down once to see it. I really didn't even trust myself to see something like that. So during the Sunday of Battle of Billings Bridge, I went down just to have a walk and see. I did get a little verbal against some of the far righteous because they don't seem to read their book to great detail. But I had a talk with a young trucker that was there. I'm sure it was live streamed, but I just gave him advice as someone who said, emergency act's going to happen. When the police move in, you won't be out of here. If that's your rig, it's just going to be gone. And I think I saw his rig move on the Friday morning of the few that left. So maybe it got through. But when you are so polar opposite, or when people are literally acting like a cult, in echo chambers, not believing anything, everything else is a conspiracy, or everything else is wrong. Well, there isn't really a middle ground to meet. And this is why this is so important, this commission, to actually have third party. Right now, we are investigating the use of the Emergencies Act. Good on them. It was time. You know, you had 3 weeks. We were on our 3rd week of sleep deprivation. And I know from the military what happens on the 4th week. I said we were simply a week away from the citizens of this city doing the OPS job for them. You know, and when you have elderly coming down to stand, like to be with you out front, and they're in their mobile scooters and they're going, you know what, when that happens, I'm coming down to watch. You know, so we had a bond. There was a bond of people that just kept showing up randomly. We didn't tell each other who we were. We had veterans show as well out front of OPS because of threats and everything. We had people walk all the way over from Gatineau, and they wouldn't identify themselves. We're just here to support you and stand with the citizens of Centertown.
Right.
You know, and
I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about what you referenced in terms of the threats and doxing and an intimidation that you experienced. And I think both Monia and I were jarred to imagine receiving 21 death threats during that short time span. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about the nature of that? And I'm curious, for instance,
everything from
as to whether, sorry, just 1 minute, as to two things. How much of that was actually happening kind of face to face in person versus online or other ways? And then secondly, if you ever reported any of that to the police?
I've experienced this year, not only online, I've had it in person. During the time out front of the OPS station, I had them literally pull right over in their vehicles, come waving their flags in front. I was shouted while doing a safe walk. I was shouted threats and homophobic slurs coming back from one of my own counter protests that we had. I believe that would have been, I think that was top. I'm not sure. But it's a genre. I have not reported them because, you know, if I feel that they are serious enough threat and you're right in front of me, then, you know, I have the same training. You know, I'm also a Dean's Honors graduate of Police Foundation. Some of the OPS taught me when I went through college. But the thing is I might not react the same way as other people to such things. If I take them real serious, then yeah, I'll probably go lay in the information myself. But everything from popping online, saying, you know, we're going to get you, you're not a veteran, or just comparing, the comparison trap of service, just many things occurred in the last little while. Every once in a while I get another random. I'm sure if anyone's watching this, I'll get another one. You know, it's simply decorum. There seems to be a lack of decorum and social cohesion happening in Canada.
So did you take any measures? I guess I'm kind of hearing you say that you weren't convinced that those death threats were serious.
I go dig around, see if they've unlocked, if the profile still exists. Have they made a fake profile to do it? You know, the gentleman who was yelling at me, I basically told him that he wanted to get himself across Elgin Street so that I could just forget his face, you know, not the person to threaten. You know, the police chief, like the interim police chief Bell, literally stated he did not want to see any two-spirited or LGBTQ homophobic comments in his city. And that's what I said to the gentleman. I was like, you want to go, before those officers, get told, and like discretionary, like, yeah, go away. You're a bigot, go away. I got no time.
So you weren't, so you didn't report these particular incidents, the death threats that you had received?
I have a liaison officer through 2022 with the OPS. I just let her know, but I mean, I never filed anything. I have filed so far this year only 2 incidents with incident numbers. One was anti-Semitism being flung down in front of Tupac Church from a gentleman there. Basically, I did actually report that just because no one should have to experience that. I am not Jewish, but no one should be saying the things that I heard on the streets of our city. So I did report that and do an incident number on that issue.
And you said there was two reports?
Yeah, and I can't really remember the last one, but it was I just filed something. What was that one for? Oh, they rushed a gentleman who lived down by the church, and I filmed it. And basically, it was just, as a witness, I gave a witness statement to an incident number on that. But I mean, the issue at hand is basically, how do we address this moving forward? If one political wing of Canada coddles this, or let alone actually went out and sided, shook hands with these people, met with these people to become a leader of a party, we have a much deeper problem in Canada than people are realizing right now. Right. And I will just go back to veterans and retired police officers supported what happened this year.
Let me go back to those encounters you were having with the police and the reports. So yep. You made a reference to, I think the way you described it was, I had a liaison officer. Yep. Can you tell us what that's a first? I haven't heard someone saying they had their own liaison officer. Tell us a bit more about that. I actually
enjoy open communication. How could I word that? Every party should know. If I'm going to do a protest, I want the OPS to know too. And if I'm doing a counter protest or whatever. So basically it's like, I'm here. This is what I'm doing. Here are my numbers. We expect neutrality. We expect you to do your job. I've always actually had a lot of professionalism with how the police interact with me. I suspect that I scream for accountability enough that they don't want me doing it at them. But sometimes you got to call out what you see. And what I saw was a failure to react. It certainly changed once, there was change once the Emergency Act was declared. There was definite change once Mr. Salali was gone. But I mean, I think a lot of people were lost. You don't negotiate with what was down there. They don't have the rational ability.
Can I just interrupt? I just want to get a little bit clear as to, so I understand kind of that wider context. I'm actually just a bit curious as to the actual practicalities of this notion of having a liaison officer. Is that to say that there was a specific police officer who was, quote unquote, kind of assigned to you, who you were having these regular?
They have, usually in these, you'll see they wear an identifying vest. Mm-hmm. If they are liaison officers to the community. One day I was just handed off to another gentleman, or two actually. One was OPP and one was OPS. Here, we are your liaison officers. They stood close to our counter protest. If there was any issues, we'd approach them. We would talk to them. They are there for not only our safety, but to just keep neutrality when there are two groups doing a protest and counter protest together. Yeah. Safety is a consideration, and I have no problem in open communication to have a line, and talk to somebody.
Okay, so this was specifically with regard to the protest you were holding outside the police station.
Outside the police station, we had engagement of officers who were just not only shift officers, but like rank and file. You could see that there was a division while we were out front of that police station for 3 weeks. You could see that the rank and file was their own, the leadership was another. As I say, when officers ask you, when Slolly's gone, are you stopping? you realize that there seems to be a bridge of communication there. There seems to be a lack of planning, perhaps. You don't have a passage of this is what you're going to do. That's a paramilitary organization. Orders come from the top. So there was something amiss, or a little rung on the ladder was missing. Something was missing. And once the Emergency Act was enacted, once Slolly was gone, someone put that rung back on the ladder and we started to get going.
All right, well, thank you. This has been very interesting, a very different perspective for us. And obviously you were doing some, quite an array of very immensely important work during that difficult month of February.
I find as a Aboriginal veteran, some of the attacks on the marginalized communities just go against why I wore a uniform.
Right. Well said. Well, thanks so much, Clayton, for joining us this afternoon. And
Thank you.
Yeah, that's those are our questions. Thanks so much.
Have a wonderful day. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
And I believe that will bring us to our fourth presenter for the afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We hear you, we don't see you. Not that there's a requirement that you have your camera on, but if you had wanted to.
Yeah, I actually intended to keep it off because of the buffering that can happen.
Okay, totally understandable.
Okay.
So I will turn it over to you to introduce yourself and then make your opening presentation.
Okay, it's Terry, and I live in the Glebe. I'm 63. I have a degree in public sector management. I am a military veteran from my teen years through to the RCAF. And in the RCAF, I was weapons officer, operations officer. I got out of the military, worked for a private company. And while I was in the employ of the private company, I was in the general support force of the military reserve. And that was the Emergency Operations Center training that I obtained through my 7 years of being in the GSF. I was trained by the DND and Emergency Preparedness Canada. I was also then back into the employ with the Coast Guard and then the federal government as a safety inspector. I am a student of history. So what I also have tenants in Nepean, federal employee, and I also have a diagnosis of PTSD from my military service. In October 2021, the police allowed a testing regime instead of vaccinations at the Ottawa Police Service, and that was met with a public outcry, and city councillors were quite upset. At the end of October, the chief announced the full vaccination for the police by the end of January. This is a bit of the background to what I was observing. So in December, I found out by looking at the Canada Unity website that they delivered to the Governor General, the Senate, and the United Nations the Memorandum of Understanding that, if you read it carefully, is an insurrectionist document. They want to overthrow the government. And that was delivered in December. In January, on the 26th of January, the Wednesday before the protest, my wife and I were well aware that the protesters were not leaving once they arrived. That was in news interviews with the protesters as they drove across Canada. That was a Facebook post by the convoy participants, and it was on Twitter by just about everyone. They were talking about holding the line until they resign. On the 26th of January, the Somerset Ward Councillor Catherine McKinney notified the city that this is what she's actually seeing on her Facebook feeds, and that they were going to make permanent gridlock around Ottawa. So after they started to arrive, I told my wife, with my emergency operations center training, I said, if you're going to have a disruptive activity like bring big trucks, they won't let them park in the core. That doesn't make any sense. No professional would ever allow that. And then they did. So then I told her that if they allowed trucks of that size into the core, they would be searching those trucks to make sure that they didn't carry explosives or weapons. I do not believe to this day that anyone has given evidence that any activity of searching the vehicles was done. Even though hate groups had been included and documented on their way across Canada, this didn't happen. So then we look at controlling access to the area. It has been done in the past with Canada Day, festivities, all sorts of security arrangements around presidential visits. But there was no control of access when they parked those trucks, and it never occurred for at least a week or two. Then came a very problematic time for me. It was very disruptive to my mental state, is when I saw the police chief give vehicles and trucks charter rights that only citizens, human beings possess. He'd said it over and over again in public statements. Those false claims emboldened the actual protesters or insurrectionists with misinformation coming from the chief of police. He also made false claims that the oath of office never covered this type of protest. And I then went and found the oath of office, and it does. It covers all sorts of, I can just read it to you later in questions if you want. It's only a couple of lines, but for brevity, it covers it. So he lied about that. He also, the police, I think it was a little bit later, made claim that they could not stop water from entering in fuel cans at the site. So they showed video evidence of people bringing fuel cans in, and one of them was filled with water and they're drinking from it. And I don't know how simple an exercise it would be if you've got a refusal to let fuel going into the restricted area, how you could not establish that there was actually fuel in the cans. And a good example of that is bottled water at an airport. Try and bring a jerry can of water through security. Why couldn't we do that in a restricted area and say only bottled water can come in? So the false claims that police were gathering evidence and videotaping and getting things ready for the court cases. To this date, I've heard of one policeman being police person being charged. And there was evidence of 10 police walking in many feeds, news feeds, and not gathering evidence, no video, no documentation, no writing on pads, no license plates being written down. Also, the false claims that the tow industry cannot be forced to work when the city issues a license to operate a tow truck in this city. It's a new program. Why were those not revoked if they didn't? It goes on. The incompetence or a complicity of the police was becoming very evident. I believe there's a little bit of both in the police services, and then it was fed as well by the legal services in the city, causing massive delays in carrying out their duties and getting Section 63 of the Criminal Code being considered. There was constant talk about we're meeting with and we're discussing all options, and yet that's the most powerful option being out there, and no one was using it. The fire services, again, were not doing their job. There's control of propane and fuel caches in public areas. Those are dangerous goods. And another very serious concern, again, from my experience of history as well as in the military, is that the Oklahoma bombing in the United States, the bomb was made with fertilizer and diesel fuel. And a truck parked below the PMO's office was a truck labeled a greenhouse truck. Greenhouses use fertilizer. I don't know how anyone in any common sense would ever allow fuel in once that was known. So my history background brings me right back to what happened in Europe in the 1930s, starting in 1921. Funny, it's 100 years plus a year, maybe 101 years earlier, where the brown shirts and the black shirts were created. You're gonna have to look at the Nazis and the Mussolini version of it to understand what those are. But in the same vein, we had the protesters with a force they called the enforcers. It was on their website. They were active. They had, I believe, 70 participants, volunteers to be enforcers, to provide the security for the actual protesters. So that is quite concerning. My interactions were seeing protesters in my neighborhood. It was seeing them on the highway or at intersections. And one of the trucks had assault weapons on the door, crossed like a cross with 2 assault weapons. And my wife and I could not look at the truck because they were beside us and hanging out with their window down and smoking. And it was reminiscent of an ISIS truck in a Middle Eastern city. And we both left that intersection and said, I can't believe this is Canada. We're looking at mayhem, and these are these are, I guess, naive and very angry people that are going down and supporting these insurrectionists. I was fully engaged by constantly submitting information to the city, province, and federal government, and that was very frustrating. I found out that the police are immune from input or change. It's only the Solicitor General of the province that has any control over them. And that is disconcerting because our provincial government was absent throughout that first 3 weeks or 2 weeks, and intentionally absent. And that was making anxiety very serious for my family, because we now looked at it that we didn't have provincial support, we didn't have city support, and the only thing left was the federal support, and they're the last to be called because the city has to go to the province, and the province has to go to the federal government. The federal government can't just come in. So the steps were not being made because of the province. The media was a bit complicit because while
Terry, if I could just maybe suggest that you move towards wrapping up maybe in the next minute so that we can move on to questions.
Sure, I'm at my last line. As a result of the ongoing, what appeared to be the collusion by the police and fire services, and I don't mean everyone in the police force or fire services, but there was enough collusion. These forces did have the authority to arrest and remove the safety reasons, remove these insurrectionists for safety reasons. They didn't do that. It left mental and resulting insomnia, anxiety, and physical injuries to myself. For the first time in my life, this is my last line, I had a serious conversation on purchasing a firearm to protect ourselves in the event that they came and blocked our street and started to corrupt or create mayhem amongst the houses in my neighborhood. I can't believe that I would ever consider owning a gun. I'm a responsible person. I used to be on shooting competitions. I know how they work. I do not want to own one, but it was a sad day when my wife brought it up, and I said I was thinking the same thing. That's how bad it was here. And this is not in the core. And I have to say, the poor people in the core that were affected 24 hours a day, I feel so bad for them. And it's just sad. So that's it.
All right. Thanks very much for that, Terry. Monia, did you have any questions you wanted to ask?
Sure. Well, thank you, Terry, for your testimony. That was very, very insightful. And yeah, this is basically, yeah, those hearings are giving us very different perspective from what we are hearing, and probably they complement in a way the full picture of what we started hearing with the commission. So thank you for sharing what you have been through. I have actually maybe two questions. The first one, it's I would like to clarify. I didn't understand very well. You were talking about. I think you said it was on their website or something, or the enforcers.
Yes.
Can you please explain that better for me? Yeah.
Yes.
And you mentioned a number 70. I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
Yes, and I unfortunately I was busy trying to put information together for through the city councilors, because you cannot, unless it's a 911 call, you during that insurrection, you could never get through to any police command post or any forum that would respond within 14 days, which is their standard response time. So I didn't take a screenshot of it, but I think people were probably documenting it. On the website, I actually was active in shutting down several funding website links, and I reported them to the actual GoFundMe, and I found out the next day they were shut down, but they were active for weeks. There was not very good, without that, would it keep going? And there wasn't, they were just moving money around or points of contact to where to put money if you want to support these things. And I was just finding them by going and seeking out, using keywords in those websites to see if there's a place that I can find to donate. So that's one thing that was going on. And I also came across on their website that they had an enforcer group. And I believe there was 70. And I wish I would have got a screenshot of it, but it may be taken down, but I'm hoping someone documented it. But these enforcers were for enforcing the safety of the convoy. And
when you say it was on their website, what do you mean? Whose website?
there was a couple of websites. One of them was the code name Bear Hug or something like that. And that was the code name for the convoy. And another one was that Freedom, what was it called? I mentioned it earlier, that right at the very beginning, Canada Unity. Canada Unity was, I think, the central website, of which Bear Hug was one of the buttons in it.
Okay.
I believe that's how it went.
Okay.
And within those websites, there was a get involved in all this, and then they had a sub website that had 70 members, and become an enforcer, volunteer to be an enforcer, and that was straight out of Hitler and Mussolini's playbook, that you bring in the brown shirts or the black shirts, depending on who they were, and they become more successful at fighting crime than the police, giving them validity. And once they have validity, then the population starts to believe that they are actually better than the police and more effective at saving them from harm. So they get validity, and then they become more active in the political world. And that's my naive, or I guess shortened version of how the brown shirts and black shirts went about their business. And then they got violent, and they started everything that we know about in World War II, about the background before World War II.
Well, thank you for that. I have another question, and you were open about saying that you have PTSD, and also you had mentioned at the end how this whole experience brought you to think of buying a firearm for the first time. Did you feel that you were in a sort of, did this environment brought you to the battleground environment? like anything in particular? You spoke about the trucks, and then the fact that those trucks were not checked, the fact that there are unfortunately similar events that happen. So did you feel that this was like somehow like very dangerous, I would say, environment?
Yes, exactly. It was, I think, the single most dangerous environment that I have ever seen in a large scale. Because of these things. There was a motivated group, a large motivated group that had taken over a core of a city, and the police appeared to be in collusion with them by not warning or preparing for them, warning city. Something else that I found out through my counselor was that the emergency operations center for this was only initiated, which it activated operations on 29th of January. And activated if you look at what 3 steps there are, there's monitoring, activated, and a state of emergency in the emergency operations center. There's 3 stages. They were on monitoring until they arrived. Then they went active. And then on February 6th, they declared a state of emergency. It was all out of whack. I do not understand how anything like this could get even a week before getting here, that they were not activated and in a command post situation, figuring things out. It was astounding to me. The minute that there was going to be more than 200 people, they should have been getting it close to being activated. So that whole situation with my wife and I, we looked at each other, we said, who do we call? You can't call the police because they're not doing anything. So if there's mayhem on our street or they're harassing people on our street, do I go outside and try and protect them against these numbers of people coming out of pickup trucks? Who knows what's inside the trucks? They could have guns. So the only reason that we discuss that is, like, if we're holed up in our house, so they're kicking down doors looking for food because they don't have any money or whatever, what do we do? I mean, how do you protect yourself from that? And that was the discussion. Now, having said that, we both discounted that was an unreasonable thought, but it was one of those anxiety-driven thoughts that came across us that I've never, ever wanted to own a gun. I see them as just an opportunity to do harm, unless you're a hunter or a farmer that's defending his crop, his livestock. That's the 2 times that I could see that they would be reasonable. And even then, suicide rates are very high amongst farmers with weapons because they are accessible. So those are the dangers of having them, and then people stealing them. So the whole thing was just a conversation, but I can't believe that it happened, and it happened in my city, and in what is normally a very nice city to live in. And then it became this, where the police couldn't be trusted, and the province isn't sending any type of support here, at least for the first 2 weeks. It was very, very serious concern of ours.
Thanks.
Thanks, Terry. I had a question for you as well. I wanted to pick up on something you referred to towards the end of your presentation, which was you indicated that you had, I think the word you used was constantly been submitting information to various bodies or to government. I assume these are sort of complaints or reports. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit, or maybe give us a couple of examples of who you were sending what kind of information to, and I guess importantly, what kind of response you were getting.
Okay, so I was the first days I wrote to Transport Canada and the Premier of Ontario to revoke the transport licenses of the trucks, because they need a license to travel within the province or interprovincially. And that would be easy. They just have to go to the trucks and say, if you don't move this truck, you can no longer operate as a commercial vehicle. So that was one of them. Then I wrote the Justice, not Justice, the Attorney General, and asked them to consider the terrorist designation, because if you read the terrorist designation in the criminal code, they actually meet the definition of terrorist, that they are trying to force the government to do something that's not in the government's or the public's best interest. So they met that, but that's a very serious thing. And I know politically, the Conservatives would have a very big thing to make out of that if they tried to label them as terrorists, even though I thought they met the definition of terrorist with my understanding of that definition. Then I contacted the city fire department and the city councillors and the police board about the diesel, and I included my Capital Ward, Somerset Ward, and Vanier as contacts, and I got responses back from the councillors that actually read the content of my documents and sent it on. They said they were forwarding it on. Those are a few of the things that I was doing, and then I was on the asking the media to consider that they're actually interviewing criminals in the process of committing a crime. So it was maybe not in the best interest of Canadians to have interviews with criminals that were carrying out a criminal act while it was being carried out. So so that was a concern that I brought up. And there was many more examples of what I was doing throughout that period.
Did you make any specific reports to the police?
There was no way for me to get through to the police. 911. I tried to find a link to submit to the police the things that I was coming up with, and one of them was how to arrest people at 3 a.m. Why were they not doing that? Those are the types of things that, in an operation, that's the best time to do it. Everyone is, all the support people are all gone home, and you've only got a minor core of people, a couple hundred people at the most, so you could arrest a few each night. That I had to go through the Police Services Board to submit it, because I could not find anywhere that was available to me to submit to. I think I did end up finding a link on the police site for something, but again, a lot of the stuff that you submit to the police is reviewable in 14 days. So a good 12 to 24 to 36 hour turnaround wasn't even going to be considered based on their website or their response time if you phone it in.
So you said you did get responses from the councillors when you reached out with your concerns about the diesel. Did
Yes.
you get replies or responses from any of the others that you were submitting information to?
Some were very late. The MPP for my writing, he was responding to me and forwarding it on. I'd have to go back through my emails and see if the Solicitor General, the federal politicians have staff that they did say that they were forwarding on my information and thanked me. It might take, there's a lot of information coming in, so it may take time, and I understood that.
So it sounds like maybe you were getting some responses from the politicians or their offices, but I'm not hearing about any replies coming from the actual agencies or departments that have the responsibility to be doing something.
Yes, and some of that was generated like that after the police let them park without inspecting them and all this. Then it's a matter that's, you know, it started to build on itself where the police were becoming overwhelmed because they let this happen. And they're, you know, whatever I was sending in was now becoming it was becoming too late, if you know what I mean. It was like, okay, now that we've got this, we got to, you know, how do you deal with this? Well, now we had the police chief saying, I need more people, I need more people. Well, if I suggested, you know, to bring the red zone in each day, which I did, to bring it forward each day, and then tow trucks get rid of the or just arrest people that are hanging around loitering, because there are laws about that as well. If you're doing that, then you know, you need staff to do that, and he was complaining that he didn't have enough staff almost from the get-go. So it's hard, other than the global things about the diesel and the fertilizer and that, it's hard to expect much of a reaction when he kept saying, slowly kept saying, I don't have people to do this. We're just holding on right now until we get more people. So I don't know how much credence that actually had, because like I said, I saw groups of 10 walking around. We counted them, we froze the TV screen and counted the number of cops, and we got up to 10 at times, and they weren't taking evidence or doing anything like that. And today it's disappointing to not see any charges being laid that I've seen. No publicity about all the evidence that they got. In the police board meetings, I went back and I watched all the meetings, and they talked about at the beginning that they're going to need more storage facilities for all the evidence that they're going to get. That was Acting Chief Bell said, we're going to need to rent facilities to store all our evidence. Don't know if they did, and I don't know what evidence. I didn't hear of any evidence being gathered. Maybe the street cams, the blurry street cams is what they were counting on. I don't know.
Right. All right. Well, thank you so much for this, Terry. We're at the end of today's session, and you've given us a lot of very helpful background, and clearly were someone very diligently trying to make officials take this seriously. And I think that's a really important part of the whole convoy experience that we've been hearing from a lot of people about, how distressed people were about the failure of government, the failure of police to be taking the steps that were needed to protect the community. And I think you've described that very well for us. So thank you so much for your presentation.
Okay, thank you.
And I believe that brings us to the end of today's session, and want to very much thank Sean, Nugs, Clayton, and Terry for joining us and sharing their experiences. We know that it's a big step to do so. As Nugs's testimony certainly reminded us, this is very real and personal, and can bring back painful memories, and we're therefore very appreciative of that. I'd repeat what I think Debbie said earlier, which is to remind everyone that we do have counseling and other supportive resources available to anyone who finds that this is in any way difficult or is bringing back and triggering difficult memories. So please do reach out or look on our website to see where those resources are. We have much more to come. We have many more sessions starting to be scheduled, both in person and online. So I would encourage you to watch for those details on our website. And certainly anyone who has been listening in today who perhaps hasn't yet come forward, but would like to, please do reach out if you want to provide written submissions, or if you would like to find a way to be part of an upcoming session, because we want to hear from you. That's what this is all about, absolutely. Thank you, as always, to our interpreters who play such an important role of making sure that we're broadening the access of our proceedings. Thank you so much for that. Thank you to Commission staff and volunteers who are doing the hard work behind the scenes to make sure that this all comes together. And certainly thank you so much to Monia and to Debbie, my wonderful colleagues, for being part of today's proceedings. And with that, I think we can wrap up.
Yes.